We are now in Genesis chapter 39. Genesis chapter 39, in the next few chapters, are very interesting passages regarding the life of Joseph after he was sold as a slave into Egypt. And these are very popular Sunday school stories that we have learned from young. Now, today, I would like you to pay attention to how the text is explained so that you have more understanding of how the story is unfolded. Let us take a look at a couple of things. It begins to say that now, at this point in time, after the chapter 38 intermission of Judah, the story now comes back to Joseph, because in chapter 37, Joseph was sold to the Ishmaelites, or they were also called the Midianites, and they took Joseph into Egypt. Now, the important thing about the fact that it was said to be taken down to Egypt. Now, all these are terrain information. Egypt is lower than where Joseph was in Canaan. So that's how we would read some of these words. They were taken down to Egypt, and in this case, it is beyond Sinai, and it would go down to where the Nile River will be. And because the Nile River is the end of that river where it flows to the sea, it would be the lowest part of the flow of the river. And that's how we would read these words, up, down. And so when you read in, say, the New Testament, Jesus went up to Galilee or up to Jerusalem, you need to understand that it's with regards to the terrain. Down to Jericho. Why? Because Jericho is located far down next to the Dead Sea. And so the terrain itself gives us this picture of up and down. So that's how we would read this. Egypt has an old name called Mitzrayim. That's the Hebrew name for Egypt. Now, at this point in time, the story goes like this. And Potiphar, the officer of Pharaoh. Now, I want to point out to you that the word officer has another meaning. It also carries the meaning of a eunuch. And you remember, I mentioned to you that in the ancient kingdoms, you find that the right-hand man of the kings and the emperors are usually eunuch, where they are committed to the work and they would not disturb the palace women. Now, we don't know for a fact whether Potiphar was a eunuch or not, but we did know that Joseph was assigned. Now, there are two names that were used for officer for the word eunuch, and it is used here with regards to Potiphar, and it was also used with regards to the officer in charge of Daniel in Daniel chapter 1. And we also read that Daniel never had children, was never married, and Potiphar is married, and because we'll read about his wife. Joseph, as assigned to Potiphar, Joseph was also married. And so we learn about that. So we know for a fact when you read about families of these people that they are not eunuchs where they have children. Now, moving on, that's not too important. As an officer of Pharaoh, he would be one of the right-hand men, the captain of the guard. An Egyptian, Potiphar is really an Egyptian, brought him down from the Ishmaelites. They were the traders who bought over from the brothers, and taken him down there. See, again, these words, down, always going down to Egypt, not going up to Egypt, because it's of a lower terrain. Now, understand this. The Lord was with Joseph. Now, remember, Joseph had his dreams, right? And hence, we know that Joseph had a very unique relationship with Jehovah and with this capital L, Lord. This is Jehovah. And he was a successful man. Now, the word successful means things that he does is smooth. That's how we would read it, right? He is prosperous. And we use that English word, prosperous. But basically, he is successful because the things he do moves forward. All right? The things he do moves forward. That is what success and prosperity means in the old days. It doesn't mean rich, as what Chinese thinks about prosperity. And he was in the house of his master. Notice the word master is important. It is the same word, Adon. And so we have the word for God, Adonai. It's master. And it's a powerful master. And so Potiphar is powerful in the eyes of the Egyptians. And his master saw that the Lord, you can see that the master Potiphar, although an Egyptian, recognizes God was with Joseph, and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. And so there is a recognition that the life of Joseph can show the existence of Jehovah God. That should let us know that regardless of what roles we play on earth, whether as a boss or a servant, in this case, a slave, God is shown in his life. And the master can recognize that. Now we also come to verse 4, and verse 4 gives us another picture of grace. Remember, I've kept telling you all, grace can be found in the sight, in the eyes of the master, of one who is stronger. Noah found grace in the eyes of God. Joseph found grace in the eyes of Potiphar. And he served him. And Potiphar allows him to serve. And not only allows Joseph to serve, he allows Joseph to be the overseer of his house. He trusted Joseph because he realized Joseph is a man of Jehovah. Not just a God of Egypt, but is a God of Joseph. And he had put everything under the authority of Joseph. Now, can you imagine an Egyptian trusting Joseph, not because he was called Joseph, but because he could see that God was with him. And this is the God that even Potiphar recognizes. And so it was. Grace was in the eyes of Potiphar when he looks at Joseph, because he was a man of God. He was successful before God. God prospered what he did with his hands. And to Potiphar, that would be the best thing, that he would have the favor of God on his house. And so from the time that he had made overseer of his house and all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. You see, the favor of God was on Potiphar, but because it was Joseph who found favor in the eyes of God. I guess when we have favor in the eyes of God, the people around us, the people who are with us, will also enjoy these blessings. These are good things that comes. And we're not talking about prosperity with money. We're talking about the things that they want to do is smooth. It moves forward, right? This is the idea of success. And the blessing of God was on all he had in the house and in the field. So two things that Potiphar had. Everything in the household and everything in the land. So Egypt is a place of agriculture. And so the field itself grew. And thus, he left all that he had in Joseph's hand. And he did not know what he had expected for the bread which he ate. Who is he? is Joseph. Joseph did not expect anything from Potiphar. Joseph was committed to do what he was assigned to do. And in this case, you would see that as Joseph found grace in the eyes of God, Potiphar recognizes the power of God, recognizes the blessings of God, and entrusted. Notice, people trust men who have God in their lives because they can see that these people are honorable, trustworthy, and trusted in Jehovah, who will bless Joseph and whatever he does. Now that is what you would call Potiphar taking, you would say taking advantage, but he can see the advantage of having Joseph in his house. Okay, that is to tell us that really, if we trust God, it doesn't matter where we are, whether in Canaan with Jacob and the brothers, and now as a slave in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, as long as you have God, and as long as you find favor, right? Notice, find favor in the sight of God and serve God, then it is good. All right? That would be an encouragement. Now, the description of the narrative takes a pause and describes Joseph. You see, Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. These two things are about the same. The Hebrew way of saying the same thing twice is a matter of emphasis, right? It's a matter of emphasis. Beauty in form, meaning this is beauty. Now, of course, the English don't like the word beautiful for man, so handsome, right? Meaning very good to look at. In form and appearance. What is form? Form would be the shape, right? Appearance means good for seeing. So this is in shape and in the facial look, I guess, right? And all you can conclude here is it is an emphasis of how pretty boy Joseph was. He's still in his young man teens, right? And it came to pass that after seeing these things, what are these things? This here. Nice to look at, nice, handsome young man with good build, that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said to him, "Lie with me." Now, this is a very straightforward conversation. She said, "Have sex with me," right? Now, one of the interesting things is that we don't know about any children that Potiphar had. We do know that Potiphar had many people in the house with many servants and many fields. And so maybe Potiphar was a eunuch. We don't know. But nevertheless, it is the wife that saw the appearance, and he was the next in line in the house. But look at what Joseph did. Now you notice we read about Joseph finding favor or grace in the eyes of God. You can also understand why God blessed him. He refused. This in itself is important. The temptation, and you understand in the Hebrew terms, temptation is not sin. Yielding to temptation is sin. The law of God is very much like human law. They do not judge you on what you think and what you see, but on what you do. And so when Joseph refused, that was an action of rejection, right? He refused to entertain the master's wife. And so he said to the master's wife, and understand, master's wife is also important in the house. He said, look, my master does not know what is with me in the house. Meaning, the master is not at home, but he has committed all that he has to my hand. And this is trust. Potiphar trusts Joseph. And now Joseph is telling back the story. There is no one greater in this house than I. Why? Because in the house, number one is Potiphar. And what does it mean? Number two is Joseph. And this is a trust. It is not a ranking or a position. Joseph knows full well that it is an honor to serve with Potiphar. And it is because Potiphar trusts Joseph, Joseph had refused because he is honorable and remains trustworthy. This is important. How trustworthy are we in the things that we have been entrusted? He has kept back nothing from me except you. Now, why? Understand, in the Hebrew mind, the wife is the woman of the husband. And so in this case, the master's wife, it belongs to the master. And so Joseph knows full well never to take advantage of what does not own by him, not entrusted to him. The wife was never entrusted because you are his woman. Now, unfortunately, English is about wife. Now, in the modern day, things are casual, but not in the Hebrew sense. In the eyes and the mind of Joseph, he says, how then can I do this great wickedness? See, to him, adultery is to take over somebody's woman. And he says that this is great wickedness. And this is also called sin against God. Now notice, how did Joseph know all these things? It is very much part of that culture. It is also very intuitive to all of us. That as the master can assign everything to Joseph, the one thing that he has ownership is the woman. And this is a time before the Ten Commandments was given. It was a time before the law was given. How did Joseph know? It is a natural law. That in every one of us, we know we don't kill. Genesis chapter 9, do not shed the blood of another. God will demand our blood. And here, there will be no taking over another man's woman because it is considered sin against God. And even then, you realize it is not the law that was given, but it is a direction of God. Why? Because Joseph knows God. How can you please God and find favor in God's eyes unless you know what God is pleased with? Faith, trustworthiness, knowing what offends God is adultery. That you do not worship other gods, and it is a grievous sin. And so Joseph knows all these things. So let us not be having the wrong thinking that, oh, if it's not spoken in the Bible as sin, then it is not sin. Intuitively, we know, and that's one of the things I wanted to spend some time to show you. There is no law of Moses now. It is intuitive that you do not take other people's things. And a woman that belongs to Potiphar as a wife belongs to Potiphar, and you do not take that woman. All right? Now, verse 10. Obviously, we know something is up. And so it was, she spoke to Joseph day by day. Now, notice this is a process of temptation. It is not a one-time thing. She may have agreed and accepted, but she went on day by day. Now, eventually, the patience of Potiphar's wife wore out. that he continuously did not heed her, to lie with her, or to be with her. This is important because this is a reflection of sin against God. In Joseph's mind, who is greater? God, Potiphar, or Potiphar's wife? And obviously we know, as a matter of fact, that God is the greatest, and he was not about to offend God, and he fears God. Moving forward. We come to verse 11. Now, after a period of time, this is what happened. This is what the narrative said. This happened. It wasn't the usual teasing, tempting of Joseph and accepting that Joseph continually refused to yield to that temptation. Now, there was this one time, Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was inside. Now, notice, there were no children discussed, which is why we spoke that maybe Potiphar was a eunuch. Now, none of the men was inside the house, meaning these were all the servants. And then she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." Sounds like another one of her temptation again, but he left his garment in his hand and fled and ran outside. Notice, this is a very unusual. He literally ran away because she caught him by his garment. Meaning, this time she wasn't about to let him go. And so he ran away. Notice, running away, fleeing, these are all very active. It's not in the mind that he said no. It is by his actions he said no. And so it was. When she saw that he had left his garment in his hand and fled outside, remember, fleeing, then she called the men of her house and spoke to them. And this is really entrapment, and it's to blame him for doing nothing, right? "See, he has brought in us a Hebrew to mock us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And it happened when he heard that I lifted my voice and cried out, he left his garment with me and fled and went outside." I can imagine, and you can also imagine, that if you never read about this, maybe you would also believe Potiphar's wife, because he had left his garment. And I guess you can say, there is no yan zing, there is mat zing, right? You can have his coat with him, right? And this would be his outer garment. Now the story goes this way. In verse 16, she kept his garment until his master, who is his master? Potiphar, came home. She spoke to him with words like these. Understand this, she made up a story to accuse him falsely, and this would be false accusation. Now, in the Hebrew context, God has always demanded that you have a witness of 2 or 3 persons to give the testimony, to collaborate. Otherwise, one person doing so can never accuse another. But in this case, she was the one who spoke these words. "The Hebrew servant whom you brought," that's Joseph, "you brought to us," and blame the Potiphar. "He came in to mock me." Now understand this. The word mock is to laugh. All right? You remember the name for Isaac, Yitzhak. Well, that's the same word. To mock, to laugh. And so, it happened as I lifted my voice and cried out, he left his garment with me and fled outside. Now understand this. The woman or the master's wife never came to say that he forced himself on her. The word used is mock, and it comes from the word yitzhak. He laughed. And laughing can take a few angles, right? You laugh in mocking, you laugh in disbelief, you laugh happily. It's all laughing. And so we learn that from the name of Yitzhak or Isaac, that initially Abraham did not believe, he laughed. Sarah did not believe and she laughed. And when they actually have the son, they both laughed. And of course, the final laugh was really laugh of joy. And so the woman said, he laughed at me. He mocked me. And when I lifted my voice and cried out, he left his garment now. Nobody asked why he left his garment and fled outside. Now, it leads a person to think that he did something wrong. And that was exactly what Potiphar heard. When his master heard this voice that the wife spoke to him, your servant did to me after this manner, in terms of mocking, his anger was aroused. And Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, a place where the king's prisoner was confined. So a prison is like that. And he was there in prison. And that's how Joseph ended in prison. As an innocent person, not because of adultery, not because of rape, and not because of anything that he had done. He was trustworthy, except that he was influenced by the wife. And he was angry that he mocked the wife. Because understand this, mocking the wife is mocking the master. You are actually, well, in Oriental Chinese thinking, you have taken away the face. Or that kind of thinking. And by that, he was incarcerated. This is how we learn the story. But the Lord was with Joseph. Why was God with Joseph? Because Joseph was trustworthy. Not only that he believed God, he believed that God is with him, that he needs to live his life before God in a trustworthy manner. That's why Potiphar trusted him. But Potiphar never gave Joseph a chance to defend himself. And so this is what is interesting. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy. What is mercy? Verse 21. Mercy is chesed, right? Mercy is, well, I guess it's good that God is showing him mercy so that he would not suffer in prison. So mercy has to do with punishment. And prison is not a hotel, right? And so when you're in prison, you can be beaten or punished. And God showed him mercy and did not allow anyone to hurt Joseph. And then God gave Joseph favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. See, again, favor has to do with the eyes. And the keeper of the prison saw Joseph and had favor. For some reason, he gave grace to Joseph. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in prison. That whatever they did there, it was his doing. And notice, even in prison, Joseph was trusted. See this word committed? He was trusted upon Joseph in prison. And because the prison manager or prison keeper knew that Joseph was innocent, but nothing he can do. And so he allowed all the prisoners to listen to Joseph. And so verse 23, the keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper, just as in the household of Potiphar. So remember, when God is with him, God blessed him, And prospering means that everything he wanted to do, it moved on. And that's the understanding of prosperity. Not that people had money, that it was smooth and it moved forward. Now we go to chapter 40. Chapter 40 speaks about Joseph's incredible ability to tell dreams. There are only two persons who did this that we know of. One is Joseph and the other is Daniel. Right? So in chapter 40 verse 1, and after these things there were two persons that offended the king of Egypt, their lord. These two are the butler and the baker. And both of them were serving the king of Egypt. Now, notice, offending is good enough to be put in prison. And Potiphar being angry with Joseph for what the wife said is good enough to be put in prison. So a lot of people were committed to prison, not because you killed somebody or you stole something, but because, well, kings of those days went about by their moods, as you can tell. Now, this is not about right or wrong. This is about the story that we are given. And Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief butler and the chief baker. He put them into custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison where Joseph was confined. Joseph was in that same place. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them. So remember, Joseph was in charge of all the prisoners. And he served them. So they were in custody for a while. The butler and the baker of the king of Egypt who were confined in prison had a dream. Both of them, each man's dream in one night, on the same night, and each man's dream with his own interpretation. And Joseph came in to them in the morning and looked at them and saw that they were sad. So Joseph could not see that they had dreamed. Joseph saw that their facial expression. Now we read about this in Genesis, right? When Cain was angry, his face fell to the ground, and that's how it was expressed. So the facial expression showed that they were sad. And so he asked these Pharaoh's officer, "Why do you look so sad today?" Now this was what happened in verse 8. Verse 8 eventually said to them that, well, we had a dream. And there's no interpreter. Why were they so insistent of interpreting the dreams? Was it that it was cultural, that everybody had dreams and everybody could interpret and look for somebody to interpret so that they would know their fate? Well, one of the things that we know about dreams is usually when you have dreams, you don't remember what happened. But when you do remember, it's something special. And so they were looking for an interpretation of a dream which they can remember after they woke up. And Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretation belongs to God?" And so when we have a special dream that we can remember, and these people had, so God actually does speak to people, and it doesn't have to be his children. He spoke to the baker and the butler. He says, "Tell them to me, please." Because God, right? And in this case, it would be his God, Jehovah, that will interpret it for them. So let's look at the dreams. We have these dreams, right? The chief butler told the dream, and then he says, "My dream, there was a vine, and the vine had 3 branches, and though it budded, blossoms shot forth, clusters brought forth grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. I took the grapes, pressed them in the Pharaoh's cup, placed the cup into Pharaoh's hand." And so that's the dream. He was very vivid, right? You remember, he knows the details of his dream. So this is an unusual dream. It's an unusual dream. And here is the interpretation. Joseph said to him, "This is the interpretation. 3 branches, 3 days. 3 days, within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift your head and restore you to your place. And you will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand according to the former manner as you had when you were a butler. And do remember me when it is well with you, and please show kindness to me. Make mention of me to Pharaoh and get me out of this place. For indeed I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews. And understand, interesting, the land of Canaan is also called the land of the Hebrews now, before they inherit. Also, I have done nothing here. I have done nothing wrong, right? Nothing wrong. Understand, Joseph was innocent. But being innocent, you can still be put in prison. So one thing for sure, in prison doesn't mean everybody is guilty. And so this was said, and we go on to verse 16. And when the chief baker heard this, oh, that's a good interpretation. I was also in dream. There were 3 white baskets on my head. The uppermost baskets were all kinds of baked goods for the pharaohs. Birds ate them out of basket on my head. So notice, consistently, the number 3 was there. Now, if we do not know interpretation, we will assign 3 to anything. And so Joseph had this skill of interpretation. This is interpretation. 3 baskets, 3 days. In 3 days, the Pharaoh will lift up your head and you will hang on a tree. And the birds will eat off the flesh from you. And this would be execution. So, 1 good news, 1 bad news. So, what happened? Verse 20. On the 3rd day, which was the Pharaoh's birthday, so happened, he made a feast for all his servants, lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. Now, the word lifted up the head is an idiom. It is to look at them, to consider them. Now, what did he consider? He considered this. Chief butler, restore to his butlership again. Place the cup into the Pharaoh's hand. Verse 22. Chief baker, hang. Exactly in that same 3 days as Joseph had interpreted them. Verse 23. But the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Now, I want you to see how the Hebrew expressed the word. Did not remember. Forget. It is to say the same thing twice as an emphasis that this is what we need to pay attention, because the chief butler, 1, did not remember, did not come to mind. The word forget misplaced the memory. Both mean the same thing. 1 didn't come to mind, 1 completely forgotten, mean misplaced, mislaid it. And thereby it's an emphasis. It's a Hebrew emphasis. When you read things of that, 2 things you say of the same intent, it is an emphasis. Okay? We move to chapter 41. Now, chapter 41 is where we will end today. And we will spend a bit of time because you need to really understand this very carefully. Chapter 41 says, and it came to pass at the end of 2 full years. What 2 full years? 2 full years of Joseph in prison. Okay? That was how long he was there. Which means that the butler has gone back to the Pharaoh for a long time, and the baker was already hanged for a long time. Now, this time round, when the time came, Pharaoh had a dream. Now, again, understand, I'm sure the Pharaoh and many people have many dreams. But why was this particular dream interesting? Again, I highlight to you, he remembers the details vividly of the dream. That's why it was special. And in this dream, he stood by the river. And perhaps this would be the Nile River, because there is only one big river in Egypt, right? He stood by the river, and suddenly there came out of the river 7 cows, fine looking and fat. Now I need to point your attention, the word fat in verse 2 is bariot, from the word bara. In the beginning, God bara the heavens and the earth. And we started that by saying that it doesn't mean create something out of nothing. And here again, we see the word bara used in a form, and the English is translated as fat. Why doesn't it translate as create? Because it is with the understanding that this bara or bariot in the word here is about filling up with fat. They are fattened cows. And they fed in the meadow. Fat cows and fed in the and were eating in the meadow. Then 7 other cows came out after them of the river, ugly and gaunt. Well, very weird word, right? In verse 3, this would be thin. When you look at that, it would be scrawny, very dried up, you know, that kind of a looking cow. Nothing to eat unless they're full of parasites, right? And they stood by the other cows. What other cows? The fat cows. Fine looking and fat cows on the bank of the river. The ugly cow, or the ugly and thin cows, ate up the 7 fine looking and fat cows. And this is very strange. How does a cow eat a cow? Obviously, this is a dream. And in a dream, the Pharaoh now remembers this exactly. And it gives us an imagery that the ugly and thin cows ate up 7 bigger cows. And Pharaoh awoke. He slept and dreamed a second time that 7 heads of grain came out on one stalk. It's a very unusual stalk. And then there are 7 stalks, 7 heads of grain. Where do you find 7 grains? Every stalk used to have 1 grain, but this is 7 grains, plump and good. And then behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And so you have another one that grew up, but there were only 7 very thin heads. Fat ones and thin ones. So the emphasis is fat and thin. But more importantly is this. The story says it was blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. The 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. Again, this was very shocking because you have cows eating cows and you have grain eating grain. And then Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream. Now, it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled. Understand this. What is his spirit? Is it different from him? It was him. It was what is inside him that you can't see. That is called his spirit, right? This is how spirit, the word spirit is used. Okay? Verse 8. It moved his wind. That is the word spirit, which means that he finds that inside of him is troubling. It's like the wind is blowing around inside him. And he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt. Understand, magicians are not David Copperfield or some of these magicians. This is not magicians. Although they did do miracles, these are the wise men. They could tell what is happening. And they are supposed to be able to tell, but Pharaoh told them his dream. And interestingly, no one could interpret them. So they look at the dream and they have no idea. two very similar dreams, one about cows and one about grains. Now the time comes. The chief butler suddenly remembered Joseph. I remember this day when I was in the prison. We each had a dream one night, and this man, Hebrew man, Joseph, young man, servant of the captain of the guard, he interpreted our dreams for us. And it came to pass exactly as it interpreted, it happened. He restored me to my office. He hanged him. That's how it was interpreted. Now, verse 14. Pharaoh is desperate. Verse 14 says this. Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, brought him quickly out of the dungeon, shaved him. Why? Because there is no barber in the prison. After 2 years, must have a long beard, right? Shaved him, clean cut, changed his clothing so it doesn't smell. He came to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have a dream, and there's no one who can interpret it. But I've heard it said of you that you can understand a dream and to interpret it. Look at what Joseph says in verse 16. Joseph answered to Pharaoh, it's not in me, it's God who will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Verse 16. He remembers that what is given is to Pharaoh. Shalom. God will give you peace because right now he's troubled. His wind is blowing. His spirit is troubled. Okay? Now, let us focus on the dream. Again, from verse 17, all of it down here, there were two dreams. 7 cows, and there were 7 heads or 7 grains in one stock. These were the two dreams, and you can go back and you can read them again. They are told exactly how Pharaoh said it, which tells us this. This is not a usual dream. This is an unusual dream. Very uncommon, and he remembers exactly the details, which means that to him, he also recognizes that there is a message. And in this case, God was the one who gave him this message. Now, look at this. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, this is what I want you to focus. The dreams of Pharaoh are one. Verse 25. The dreams of Pharaoh is echad. There are 2 dreams, but they have the same one meaning. God has shown Pharaoh what he's about to do. What is God about to do? It has an impact on Pharaoh, but you need to understand, God is not dealing with Pharaoh as in Egypt. God is dealing with Pharaoh as part of a greater plan for the Hebrews, for Jacob and his family. And so in this dream, God is saying, 7 good years. The 7 cows are 7 years. And the 7 good heads are 7 years. 7. The dreams are 1. Again, he mentions 1. Same meaning. 2 dreams of 7s, and 7s have the same meaning. The 7 thin and ugly cows, they are 7 years. The 7 empty heads are 7 years of famine. So 7 years and 7 years of nothing. Famine means no harvest. Okay? No harvest. Now understand, this is God's message, which means that what is about to happen is in God's control. God is not changing anybody's mind. God is merely giving a message of what he's about to do with the environment. That there will be no harvest. That the grains that you grow, there will be nothing. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh. Remember, it's not Joseph. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. There will be 7 years of great plenty, fat cows, right? 7 heads of grain. It will come across the land of Egypt. And Egypt is a very fertile place, but after these 7 years of goodness, there'll be 7 years of famine. And all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will deplete the land. And so the plenty will not be known in the land, because the famine following it will be very severe. And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice, because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. In short, it's an emphasis. Remember? Saying the same thing twice, giving the same dream twice, in 2 separate ways. The same 2 dreams that was given to Joseph twice, right? And God gave Pharaoh twice. And it's an emphasis. So in the Hebrew concept, saying the same thing twice is an emphasis. So in short, pay attention. Pay attention. So now comes the application. Joseph said, well, you know what? Let Pharaoh pick a very discerning and understanding and a wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt. And let Pharaoh do this. Now understand, this is a very strange interpretation. After telling the interpretation, Joseph gave a recommendation. Let Pharaoh do this. Let him appoint officers over the land and collect 1/5 of the produce. 1/5 is 20% of the produce out of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years. This is also a form of taxation, right? And in this case, double the 1/10. Why? Because it has to be saved for the next 7 years. Let them gather all the food in those good years that are coming and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. And that food shall be reserved for the land for the 7 years of famine that will be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine. These are really excellent, wise words. And look at what happened. Verse 37. And so the advice was so good in the eyes of Pharaoh. Now again, eyes is very important. When Pharaoh sees it's good, there is grace. Good things are going to come. And so after Pharaoh saw in Joseph, it was good. And in the eyes of all his servants, everyone is good too. Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? Now, this is a very strange phrase. In Egypt, they are not atheists. They are a land of many gods. And in this case, you see that they are knowledgeable of this God that will reside in the person. Now remember, spirit is wind. As Pharaoh's wind was troubled, he is looking for somebody who has the character of God. That's what it means, the Spirit of God, the character of God. Because God has given this message, then the person who has the character of God can actually execute this plan. That is how wise Pharaoh is. Smart guy. Verse 39. Pharaoh said to Joseph, inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. So in the eyes of the Pharaoh, none of his people could tell him this interpretation. So 2 things will come out. One is God is with Joseph. Number 2, the words that's coming out of Joseph is very wise and understanding. And so Pharaoh said, just like Potiphar, Joseph found favor in the eyes of Pharaoh. You shall be over my house. Same thing as what Potiphar had said, over my house. Over all my people you shall rule according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. What does that mean? It means that Pharaoh, for all intents and purposes, has given everything to be under Joseph. Everything. His house, his people, his field, everything in the country, except for the throne. On the throne, there is only one number one, and that is Pharaoh. And that is what the Pharaoh wants Joseph to remember. You are number one over everything in the land, including his house. But on the throne, he is number two. Joseph may have all the power in the land, but he needs to remember his power comes from Pharaoh. Just like Joseph knew that Potiphar gave him all the power in the house and in the field, except his wife. Power came from the master. So this whole phrase literally tells Joseph there is one master, and the master is me. I have set you over all the land of Egypt. So the master gives the power. When the master gives the power, Joseph has the power, but this power must always recognize the source of the power comes from Pharaoh. That's why Pharaoh reminds Joseph, don't let it get to your head that only with regard to the throne, I will be greater than you. And so Joseph can say, the Pharaoh is greater than I. All right? Let's look at verse 42 quickly. Pharaoh took off his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck. Now, these are how Egypt would signify power, right? It's all about power. Now, in the days of ancient China, the emperor will have a seal and also a ring. And maybe in many cases, the seal is in the ring. And so when you have the ring and you have the seal, you have power. And he put it on Joseph's hand. And so this is visual. And that is how power is communicated in the eyes of everybody else. Clothe him in garments of fine linen means he has now the luxury of the palace, and put a gold chain around his neck just to signify that he is now having the luxury of Pharaoh. Verse 43, he had him ride in the second chariot he had. Interesting. There is chariot number one, maybe that's a Rolls Royce. Second chariot could be a Bentley, right? And it is recognizable. All you need to know from this is that in the Hebrew context of expression and in ancient Egypt and ancient China and in the Oriental view, everything has visual guide. There is no such thing that in the heart of Pharaoh, he made Joseph number two. It has to be seen. And so God has to anoint Saul, has to anoint David, has to anoint Solomon. And so anointing is the Messiah. And so in this case, Pharaoh has to so-called, in the Egyptian style of it, anoint Joseph. And so when he comes with his Bentley, the chariot number two, they cried out before him, bow the knee. Now, interesting, you will find bowing, verse 43, is a very interesting verse. Bowing means to put your face to the ground. Face to the ground. This is not bow down the head. You bow down the knee to the point where your face is on the ground. That is what it means. All right? That is what it means. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh. Without your consent, no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. That's how powerful Joseph is. And people are afraid of Pharaoh. Now, you need also to remember, Pharaoh is seen as the God, a living God in Egypt. Now, all through ancient civilizations, in China, the emperor is a god. In Greek, the emperor is a god. In Roman times, the emperors are gods. And so in this case, I am Pharaoh, basically saying, I'm the God. I have given you this power. You are not a God, but they will bow to you because I have given you the power, because bowing to you is like bowing to me, because you are my number two. And so Pharaoh gave him another name, Zaphnath-Paaneah, and gave him an Egyptian wife, Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, the priest of On. And so Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. Now, interestingly, God allowed this to happen, and maybe at that time in Egypt, they were not worshipping all kinds of gods, maybe. There was a living God, and there is a priest of On. And so Joseph married the daughter of the priest, which means that not only from a political side that he has the power, from a religious side, he has power too. And would it be that then Joseph's faith would be shared among the Egyptians? Joseph is now 37 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh went out of the presence of Pharaoh, and went throughout the land. And now in the 7 plentiful years, he did all these. He gathered all the food and laid up in the cities and gathered much grain as the sand of the sea. Now again, this is a very Hebrew idiom, as was told to who? Abraham, that your descendants will be like the stars in the skies and as the sand on the seashore, until he stopped counting, for it was immeasurable. It is that you can't count. It's not that it is so much that it is infinite. All right? And so that is an idiom. That's a lot to the point that you can't count. So when you look up to the stars in the sky, after a while you can't count anymore. If you look at the sand on the sea, you can't count anymore. That's an idiom. So when you read Bible verses like this, Joseph is not about to count the sand on the sea, right? It's an idiom of comparison. Verse 50, he had 2 sons before the years of the famine came, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, the priest of On, bore to him. Firstborn, verse 51. The word is Manasseh. Manasseh is to cause to forget. That's what it means. Cause to forget. And I would say that this is what he has described. For God has made me forget all the toil and all my father's house. The word toil in verse 51 is about problem, trouble. And when you have children, like Abraham and Sarah, when they had children, they laugh, right? They yitzhak in a way where they're so happy. And so when Joseph has the firstborn, he named him Manasseh, means he's now forgotten all the troubles that he had, that the brothers tried to kill him and sold him into Egypt. He had a hard life. He went to prison and so on and so forth. And so he literally forget. And he saw God along the way and he's happy. Why? Because Manasseh is the joy of his life. Verse 52. And the second is called Ephraim. Right? And what does Ephraim mean? Ephraim means I shall double my fruit. Right? God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Fruitful is just not fruit, but it's double fruit. Why double fruit? 2 sons. So this is double. And in the name of Ephraim, it concludes everything that has happened to Joseph. Quickly, let's look at the last segment and then we call it a day. The 7 years ended and the 7 years of famine began. Remember, the 2 sons were born in the time of good. When there was famine in all lands, remember, not just Egypt, everywhere else, including Canaan. But in all the land of Egypt, there was bread because there was grain and they could make bread. Now, of course, in our modern day, we say, well, there was food, right? But in the old days, bread is equivalent to food. When you've got bread to eat, you've got food to eat. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, there was no harvest, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread because they ate whatever they had. And the Pharaoh said to all Egyptians, go to see Joseph. Whatever he says to you, you just do it. That is how Pharaoh trusted Joseph. When the famine was over all the face of the earth, now notice this is not literally earth, this would be land. All the land of Egypt, there was famine. And we also know that in all lands also, not just the land of Egypt, right? But this is with regards to the land of Egypt. When all the land of Egypt had famine, Joseph opened the storehouse and sold to the Egyptians. What did he sell? He sold land. He sold the grain for land. All right? So that when the famine became severe in the land of Egypt, all countries, and this is important, in verse 57, this is in all Eretz. This would be in the land. And not just land, this is the broad land, right? The broad land. Now, in some cases, the word earth is used to translate this, which means that literally the whole world came to Joseph. Now, obviously, we're not talking about the rest of the place, but the neighbors all came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain because the famine was severe in all the land. So the word lands and countries is same word. Again, I mentioned this to you. The English Bible is translating for the English speaker. Same Hebrew word, different English words, so that we can read better. And we will end here in chapter 40. Any questions?
What is the on? Priest of On. The On is a capital letter, right? Is it the meaning of the God's name? Their God. Priest of On, yeah, is On.
46.
What's the meaning of this On?
Verse 45. On is a place. On is a place. It is near to Goshen. Right? Near to Goshen. Historically, I'm not so sure, but it may be the sun god worship, and this is Ra. On is actually a name of a place. Okay. Now, whether it is true that there's a sun god, I don't know, but basically, that's how the available Egyptology history may reflect. The Bible in here never spoke about the sun god. It only spoke about the location, right? So On is a place. On is a place near Goshen, Lower Egypt. All right. Any other questions?
So this priest actually served.
No.
Okay. Question here is this. There is a priest. What did the priest do? Actually, we don't know. All right, we don't know. In many cases, we were told, but in this case, we don't. So by inference, right, whatever they were serving, whatever God they were serving, that was the priest. Okay, whatever God was serving, they were the priest. Would that be Jehovah? We don't know. But we do know that he is a priest that is serving whatever religion was there. Understand, the word priest is generic. It doesn't have to be the priest of Jehovah. It is just the people who did special rites for the religious belief system then.
But God allows Joseph to marry.
So that was an interesting question. God allowed Joseph to marry, and yes. So that's why we don't read of what priest of what God. We don't know what On place is doing. And so it was kept very vanilla in that sense, so that we are not distracted from the story.
And really cannot understand how can the Pharaoh have this such a big trust on Joseph. You know, trust like, you know, like giving everything to him really, like he's
Correct.
his son really. And he's a foreigner, he's not the, you know, same people, same kind, you know. So it's very hard to understand how can he gain that trust. So can only look at God intervene, right, in this situation.
You could see how God worked in Joseph. If you read the whole narrative again, you would see that nobody could interpret the dream, and Joseph came and explained the dream. That was point number one, because even in the mind of Pharaoh, you have to have the Spirit of God to do something like that. No human being can do that. You can read the same concept in Daniel chapter 2, that Nebuchadnezzar recognizes that Daniel wasn't the one who had the ability. It must be the God of Daniel. And so same thing here. The Pharaoh, although he was the God of the land, realizes that the God of Joseph is more powerful, right? And you realize that people in those days, they believe in powers that is beyond their vision, right? And they could see, wow, Joseph is incredible. It's not Joseph, basically, it's the spirit that's in Joseph. And so they believe in this God is powerful, and in so doing that, if this God is more powerful, all the rest of the magicians and wise men who believe in all other gods can never match. So as wise as Pharaoh is, well, choose your best man for the job. And hence, as I mentioned to you, when we are serving God, when we represent God, when we display the character of God, no matter where we go, God will bless the work we do. The people who are affected by us in the course of our lives are also blessed. And hence Pharaoh recognized that. And yes, you're right. He could see the character of Joseph from the ability of Joseph being able to tell the dreams and the wise recommendation. Correct. And it's an incredible thing, right? Not an Egyptian. And notice that the narrative keeps saying he's a Hebrew, the son of a Hebrew. And Pharaoh knows exactly.
Yeah. So it's incredible this story.
Yeah. It would likely be at a time where Pharaoh was not so focused on the ancient religions. and he was doing what is best for his country.
Yeah.
But later on, when we read in Exodus, and that's a whole different story.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But the Bible really, I mean, in the Old Testament, a lot of things is related to Egypt.
Yes, yes. It is very important for us to realize that this whole thing about Egypt, later when we read in the next few chapters, is to fulfill Genesis chapter 15, when God promised Abraham that your descendants will be sojourners. They will be visitors in a land that does not belong to them, and they will serve them. And so we will read that in the next few chapters. And God used this event, and it's not a good event, by the way, selling Joseph into Egypt. It's a bad thing. Throwing him into prison, it's a bad thing. But in all this, God did not forget Joseph, and at the right time, God brought Joseph to bear, not because of Joseph's ability, but what God gave Joseph to be able to be wise and tell dreams. So in that sense, God was with Joseph all the way, although bad things happened to him. Okay, let's end here and we'll continue next week.
Okay.
Bye.